my computer voice audio to read the message. Now this message was about and when I finished that work at that time, I shared it with one of my friends, Engineer Leonard Obibi, and the man said, no, don't do this, any publicity is good publicity. And I said, okay, I won't share it. But looking back, that was a big mistake. That was a huge mistake for a man who forfeited $460,000 in 1990, whatever. You know how much that is? The money just found its way to his account, and then, oh, it's not me, it's my account. I don't know how the money got there. Now, this article I'm talking about was written by a formidable journalist. This journalist, fortunate for us today, I'm proud to associate with this young man. He's here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please help us with a rounding applause. I know you know him. Please welcome David HUNDEYIN to the microphone.
Thank you. I don't have much of a speaking voice, but we'll get through this. So, good afternoon, my name is David HUNDEYIN, and before I get started, I want to quickly do a piece of audience participation. So, with a show of hands, please indicate whether you've ever heard of the two following entities. So the first is called the Korean Social Democratic Party. And the second is called the Chondoist Chondu Party. Have you ever heard of it? Sure. Well, never had that until a few months ago. In case you're wondering, these are both political parties in Korea. North Korea. Yes, elections are held in North Korea. North Korea holds national and local parliamentary elections every 4 years. Something similar happens in China, which is also a one-party state, but it holds parliamentary elections every 5 years. Why am I mentioning this? Now, as many of you may know, I'm a journalist who fled Nigeria in 2020, and I currently live under refugee protection as a result of the work that I do. And whenever I talk about my work with people who are not really that familiar with Nigeria, the question is always asked, but why? It's not that they think I'm lying, it's that they don't really understand what it is about Nigeria that would lead to this kind of outcome. On the surface, Nigeria doesn't fit the profile of what you'd expect your stereotypical African, authoritarian states to look like. We regularly hold elections. In fact, just held them. We have a thriving private media space. We have constitutionally defined separation of powers. We have our 99 Constitution defines freedom of expression, freedom of association as inalienable human rights. We have an independent National Electoral Commission. We even have a Freedom of Information Act. So, on the surface, we tick most of the boxes that lead us to be classified in theory as an electoral democracy. This is what I call performance democracy. Now, in 14 days' time, despite the simulacrum of democracy that we've put together in Nigeria, the country's political establishment is preparing to swear in as its president a drug criminal who has broken just about every electoral law in existence, lost the election, and somehow also provoked a race war along the way. So clearly something is wrong here. If democracy is defined as government of the people, for the people, by the people, then the presidential candidate who was emphatically rejected by the people at the polls, whose age is 4 times the median age of Nigeria, so clearly this person is not demographically representative of the Nigerian population, and who believes that the presidency is his manifest destiny because it's his turn. How exactly is that democratic? The answer, of course, is that merely holding an election or something that closely resembles an election, only for it to announce a predetermined winner, regardless of what people have to say about it, is not democracy or anything close to it. As I mentioned when I started, even North Korea and China hold elections. There's nothing special about elections. In fact, North Korea's official name is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. But certainly none of you would suggest that the fact that it calls itself democratic and it holds elections makes it a democracy. Now, while other speakers will no doubt focus on the fallout of the disgraceful spectacle that we witnessed 3 months ago, that Nigeria's political establishment described euphemistically as an election, I'll only summarize my thoughts on those issues into the following brief points so that I can move on to something else that I want to talk about now. And these are the brief points. Now, as an investigative journalist with a key career focus on state capture, financial crime, and transnational crime, including cross-border drug and human trafficking, much of my work over the past year has. Now, going further than the court records that were on file, using subpoenas and FYA frameworks, I was also able to establish that Mr. Tinubu has told multiple lies about his background and committed multiple perjuries on his INEC EC9 declaration. The multiple lies told by Mr. Tinubu about his actual identity, his professional and educational background, and the obvious falsehoods presented on his presidential declaration form, including what I thought was the funniest thing of all, a blatantly forged Chicago State University certificate that had grammatical errors on it, which is easily traceable to a cheap online forgery service called diplomamakers.com. Make it clear that Mr. Tinubu is legally and morally unfit for office. Now, the illegality of declaring Mr. Tinubu the winner in the small hours of the morning at 4 a.m. when everyone was asleep, without any actual evidence of this supposed victory, an outcome that was not supported by any credible poll, and which INEC's own emerging data continues to contradict, makes a mockery of the credibility of Nigeria's Electoral Commission and calls into question the basic credibility of the electoral process. Now, a few weeks ago, as part of the testimony that I delivered to a UK parliamentary inquiry on a separate issue, I was asked to state what I believe the UK and its international partners should do about the situation in Nigeria and what I believe the consequences will be if these actions are not taken. Now, I know several of my co-speakers here have spoken very pointedly about the fact that the UK is not going to help, and the UK should not be viewed as the go-to entity here, but nonetheless, I was asked for my opinion, and I gave an answer, and this is what I said. So the following is an excerpt from the answer that I gave. I said, the international community needs to impose sanctions on individuals and organizations that have played and are playing key roles in destroying democracy in Nigeria through electoral malpractice and media narrative astroturfing and propaganda that assists the unapologetically fascist positioning being adopted by the ruling regime. In a manner similar to the targeted sanctions adopted against senior members of Zimbabwe's ZANU-PF regime for violating the human rights of Zimbabweans, senior figures in Nigeria's executive, legislative, and judiciary should be made to face targeted economic and travel sanctions that will bar them from doing business, owning property, or seeking healthcare in countries like the UK. These sanctions should also be extended to family members of sanctioned individuals, preventing them from acting as their economic proxies and from obtaining healthcare or education in these countries. If no action is taken, my assessment is that Nigeria as a whole will become fundamentally destabilized when the sharp divide between the leadership and the people becomes impossible to mitigate or work around. Demographically, Nigeria is already one of the most divided countries on earth, with a national median age of just 18.1 years old, alongside an aged, incompetent, out-of-touch leadership class, typified by the incoherent octogenarian who is currently being prepped to illegally assume the country's highest office later this month. Willfully ignoring clearly expressed will of the Nigerian people will inevitably lead to social unrest and instability, especially among the youth who are disproportionately affected by the problems that this very class of wannabe dictators created. This was a very important part of my submission, and I want you to listen. This kind of chaos has already been foreshadowed in parts of urban Nigeria over the past 4 years. These events are now remembered individually as the reprisal attacks against South African businesses in 2019 in Lagos, the so-called 1 million boys gang violence during the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020, and the NSAS protest later in the same year. But when examined in context, they are not standalone events. They are a growing pattern, each one more serious than the last. If the pattern persists, we will not be considering a Nigerian civil conflict or a West African regional crisis, but a major global humanitarian catastrophe that will engulf Africa and Europe. It is important to remember that essentially all of Nigeria's 200 million residents are basically 2 national borders and 1 brief Mediterranean crossing away from Europe. The total destabilization of the country with that many people, a stone's throw away from Lampedusa and Calais, would fundamentally reshape Africa, Europe, the UK, possibly the entire world as we know it, not in a good way. So those are my words to Parliament a few weeks ago, and I have an addendum. It is that if the UK actually has a commitment to promoting democracy in Nigeria and promoting good leadership in Nigeria the way it says it does, then we need to demonstrate that commitment by refusing to allow the very kleptocrats and criminals who subvert Nigeria's democracy from obtaining political legitimacy here and parking their money here. A few days ago, a Bloomberg investigation exposed the existence of a Nigerian state corruption enterprise involving the proceeds of oil thefts, which were laundered through the purchase of a mansion here in London. The buyer of said property turned out to be the son of the president-elect, who at the ripe old age of 31, and without any substantial or well-defined source of income, somehow paid $11 million cash for the mansion on Grove End Road, a few miles north of here. Now, we can hold all the parliamentary inquiries we want, we can host press conferences like this from now till cows come home, but actions will always speak louder than words. If the UK, through its silence or inaction, demonstrates that its stated commitment to entrenching democracy and promoting new leadership in Nigeria is just talk, well, the reality is that if and when Nigeria's youthful population eventually finds its way in the world and potentially becomes a larger trading and diplomatic partner, we will remember who our friends were in our times of adversity. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Now, my final words are aimed directly at the elements in Nigeria's political, judicial, and security establishment who, if they are not central to it, are enabling this brazen attempt to end all meaningful democracy as we know it in Nigeria. Because I know they're watching this. Now, 14 years ago, in 2009, I remember I was watching TV and there was a breaking story that came out, and it was this story about some Nigerian guy who tried to blow up a transatlantic flight using plastic explosives sewn into his underwear. It became an internet meme at the time, the underpants bomber. Now, at the time, as Nigerians, I was in university and I was in University Hall. There was a bit of a fallout there. His cousin also happened to be at the University of Hull. His cousin wasn't able to come back to the UK because he traveled for the Christmas. But at the time, to us, all we were worried about was maybe like potentially there'll be a bit more visa scrutiny. Maybe some people will be refused visas. But the concept of the Nigerian suicide bomber was just so unheard of to us that it became material for like Facebook viral comedy videos and basketball punchlines and Night of 1,000 Laughs. Imagine a whole Nigerian blowing himself up. Nigerians that love life so much. It was very fun. And then in 2011 it happened again. This time in Abuja, 27 people died. Then it happened again in Madala, it happened in Kadaka, it happened in Damaturu, it happened in Jos, it happened in Maiduguri, and it stopped being fun. The deaths piled into hundreds, and almost overnight, Nigerian suicide bomber went from being some sort of ethereal joke punchline to become the very real thing that we saw on the pages of Punch and Vanguard newspaper. Those Facebook viral videos from 2009 stopped loading. The comedian stopped mentioning suicide bomb. Now, why am I telling you this story? The thing about established orders is that they count on their own inertia. They don't believe that things can or will ever actually change until they do. Legend has it that during the fall of Rome, right at the moment when the barbarians were overrunning the gates of the city's legislators were locked in a debate on the subject. If a fly falls into holy ointment, is the ointment then tainted, or does the fly become holy? And then, of course, the barbarians broke in and the question didn't matter anymore. The thing is, no matter how elastic the people might be, there's always a breaking point. You just haven't found that breaking point yet. If you've been paying attention, the signs are already there. I mentioned earlier that the 2019 and 2020 riots in Lagos, which came before NSAS, were both parts of an escalating pattern. What I did not mention was that the next time young Nigerians hit the streets, they will do so fully expecting you to shoot them down as you did during NSAS, which means that they will have nothing to lose, which makes them infinitely more dangerous. In case you still don't understand what the 2023 election was and is, you should see it as one final opportunity to exit, relatively gracefully and leave the young people whom you have failed woefully to clean up the mess that you created. That is all they've asked for with their votes, and you still have the opportunity to avoid making a bigger mess. It's not too late for you to make things right, but having said that, if history is any judge, we know what you're most likely to do. And if it happens that way, well, I've spent 10 minutes explaining how it will inevitably end for you, for us, for Nigeria. And we don't pray for it to happen, but if it does, well, maybe we'll host another press conference.
Wonderful young man. Every time I look at this young man, I see a future for Nigeria. Yes. Every time I look at this young man, I see a future for Nigeria. It reminds me, quite frankly, I don't want to talk about this country. This is my country as well. But it reminds me of people like Tony Blair, and every time I look at him, I say, yes, Nigeria has a future.